It's actually gone live. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to Chattering with Nicholas Vince. In a few moments, I'm going to introduce Chuck Caruso. Before I do, I just wanted to thank everybody who's signed up to the YouTube and the Chattering with Nicholas Vince Facebook page. I really do deeply appreciate that, and the Facebook page is definitely the best place to learn about upcoming shows. So thank you very much indeed for that. Chuck, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on your show.
That's my pleasure. That's my pleasure. I'm now fascinated by the stuff you have on the shelf behind you.
This is my board game shelf.
I was thinking,
I'm an avid board gamer. I have a group of guys that I play with every Tuesday nights.
Oh wow, that sounds very civilized.
It is very civilized. Yeah, we tend towards the sort of, if you're a board gamer, this expression means something to you, but we tend towards sort of middle to high complexity Euro games, some of which are represented here.
Dungeons and Dragons.
Well, we played it as kids. We've periodically had a campaign still going on. It's hard to get people to commit to that on a regular enough basis, though.
Right. I remember when, back in the day, I never played Dungeons and Dragons. But I remember somebody being outraged because the dungeon, because somebody had said he was really disappointed in the dungeon master because they looked around the wall, this whole of this room, to find the exit to the room.
Yeah.
And it was through the staircase lifted, and he was outraged that anyone had come up with this idea. And I thought, have you never seen The Munsters?
Right, yeah.
It's kind of like, this was the opening shot of The Munsters.
Absolutely, right?
Yeah, and it's like, he was of an age when he must have seen it on, I would have thought he'd have seen it on TV. So yeah, it was cool. All right, so that explains why I didn't recognize the video titles then. Cool. All right, so we're here to talk about your wonderful book. I'm going to start by talking about your wonderful book, The Meaning of Blood and Other Tales of Perversity, which is your second book with Cloud Lodge Books. Is that right?
The second book with Cloud Lodge. The first was a novel called The Lawn Job.
Right. Which I'm going to seek out because I really enjoyed your short stories. But in terms of, as I've just mentioned, it's published by Cloud Lodge Books, and there is a link on the YouTube, so down there somewhere, if you'd like to order the book. How did the book of short stories come about?
Well, it's interesting. We had originally, Cloud Lodge and I had originally talked about publishing the collection of short stories first, before the novel. But at that point, I wasn't really satisfied, and the editors weren't really satisfied with the collection of stories that we could bring together into a coherent whole. And although short story collections by single authors are selling certainly better than they have for quite some time, there's still a bit of a challenge in the marketplace. And so our feeling was really that people would perhaps be more interested in a collection of short stories if there had been a novel preceding this. And I happened to have finished a novel that I was just starting to shop around, and so we ended up publishing that first, and I'm glad we did. It's had a good reception. It won me an independent publishing award for best regional fiction, bronze medal for that. So I'm very pleased with that, and hopefully that's primed some people to look at my short stories as well.
Cool. And you were talking to me when we were talking about events coming up, because the book was published on the 21st of November. So a few days ago, and it's available as both as a physical copy and as an ebook. But you mentioned doing a blog tour.
Yeah, we're in the midst of a blog tour right now, which basically consists of getting as many sort of willing readers to take a look at it. We've managed to follow up with some people who had read the novel, but also some new people, including what was the review today? The nerdy girl was the review today. So it's been really nice for me to see the different. Also, the Handmaid Girl published a review, so it's nice to me to see the different reactions to the book.
Right.
So far, all of them have been quite positive. The blog tour has also allowed me to do online interviews with quite a few different people. Kendall Reviews did a review with me, or an interview with me. And so that's a nice opportunity for me to sort of wax poetic about topics that are of interest to me, and hopefully of some at least esoteric interest to readers out there.
Right. Okay. And you very kindly agreed to do a reading of one of the short stories.
Yeah, I'd love to read one of the short stories. This is one of the shorter pieces.
Right. Right. Well, I think I shall just sit down. I should because having read it today, it'd be really interesting to hear it in the author's voice.
All right. So this short story is called Hellfire, and I'll just read it without further introduction. Hellfire. Chewing his beans, the stranger asked, "You ever have a woman get you in the God way?" "I ain't sure I follow you there, friend," Roger said silently, cursing himself for agreeing to let this fella share his campfire. Should have known from that damn preacher hat, tall and rounded up top with its wide brim. Should have figured this lonesome traveler had religion and told him to pass on by while he was still mounted up and looking for a place to bed down for the night. "You know," the stranger said, "you get to pledge your everlasting soul to Jesus as your eternal Lord and Savior." "You want more of those beans?" Roger asked, being polite and trying to let the subject drop. He didn't know this fellow from Adam and didn't give a good goddamn about souls one way or the other. "Thank you kindly, but no," the stranger said. "I ate my fill already." "All right then," Roger said. "I reckon I'll finish them up." "You do that," the man said. "Feed your belly." Roger grabbed the pan and scraped the last of the beans onto his plate. "I had me a God-fearing woman named Loretta. She taught me the error of my ways and set me right with the Lord. But she's gone to her eternal reward now, and I am left to wander the earth alone." "Sorry to hear that, Mr. Roger," said between bites. The stranger watched him eat. "So tell me," he said. "I sure am hungry tonight," Roger said. "Long day in the saddle." "You've been evading my question, but you can't avoid it forever," the stranger said. "What I really want to know is whether you're feeding your everlasting soul." His head swiveled so that his face was turned toward Roger under the wide brim of his dark hat. The stranger's eyes danced alight with the flickering orange flames of the campfire. Roger spooned his mouth full of beans and chewed, thinking of places he'd rather be and excuses for taking his sudden leave from this zealot. But he'd already unsaddled his horse and hobbled it for the night, already unpacked his bedroll and taken off his gun belt. It lay over yonder with his saddle. Not that he was afraid of this fella, just annoyed was all. He tried reason, talking as he continued to shovel beans into his mouth. "Listen, mister," he said, "we're strangers to each other. I don't mind some pleasant conversation, but I'd rather not have the preacher talk if that's all the same to you." Unspeaking, the man regarded Roger steadily in the firelight, but Roger avoided his gaze. "Let's just talk about the weather or our travels, but I don't care for no Jesus sermons." "Well, I apologize," the stranger said. "I didn't mean to trouble you, friend." "No bother," Roger said, relieved. "Religion's just one of those subjects is all." "Well, all right," the man said, "now that I know how you feel about it." "Yeah, I ain't got no truck with God," Roger said, "but that don't mean we got to sit here in silence. I'm sure we can enjoy some polite topic that's mutually agreeable." "Such as what?" the man asked. Roger shrugged. "Anything that comes to mind, I suppose." He set aside his empty plate. He licked the spoon and let it clatter onto the plate. "Listen," he said, "I've got some whiskey in my saddlebags that I'm willing to share if you'd like a pull or two." "I don't take no strong drink," the stranger said. "There's the devil in it." "Hope you don't mind if I indulge," Roger said. He started to stand, but the man's hand came down on his shoulder. "No, you better not neither." Roger sat back down, but he shook off the man's touch. "Unhand me," he said. "You got no business grabbing hold of me, mister. That's how people get themselves shot round these parts." The man took his hand away and held up his open palm. "I apologize." The two men looked at each other warily in the firelight. "This is nonsense," Roger said finally. "I'm done talking to you now, mister. You can bed down over there, but I need to turn in myself. I'm plumb exhausted tonight. Reckon I'll sleep like the dead tonight." The stranger's eyes flashed. "I reckon you will." Roger blinked at suddenly seeing the man standing over him with a big revolver in his hand. The end of the pistol's barrel gaped at Roger like the mouth of an open grave. The man said, "Zephaniah 1:12, and it shall come to pass at that time that I will search Jerusalem with candles and punish the men that are settled on their lees. They say in their heart, the Lord will not do good, neither will he do evil." Roger held up his trembling hands. "I'm unarmed." "Well, I ain't," the man said, and I'm talking about your salvation, friend." "What do you want?" Roger asked. "I ain't got much money, but you're welcome to what I got." "Do not tempt me with your filthy lucre. It is written man cannot serve both God and mammon." "I ain't got nothing else to offer." "You're wrong," the man said. "You've got your soul." "You want me to find Jesus at gunpoint?" "If that's the only way for you to come to him, now get on your knees." "You can't be serious," Roger said. "This is foolishness, mister." "Do not blaspheme. The Lord is not to be trifled with." The man gestured with his gun. "On your knees, sinner, or I'll finish you where you sit." Never taking his eyes from the man with the pistol, Roger shifted onto his knees in the dirt beside the campfire. "What do you want from me?" Roger asked. "I want you to open up your heart to the Lord," the man said. Romans 6:23, "For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. Now pray." Choking on his words, Roger prayed. Never a churchgoer, he didn't really know what to say, but he confessed all his sins that he could remember. The man listened silently, holding his tongue in his head and his gun on Roger. "Good," the man finally said. "Now pledge your soul to Jesus and accept him as your Lord and Savior." Roger spoke the words. "Can I stand now?" he asked. "Do you promise to go your way and sin no more?" the man asked. Roger nodded. "Yes, I do." "Liar," the man said. "All of us are sinners in the eyes of the Lord." The roar of the big pistol filled the darkened woods as a dark blossom appeared in the center of Roger's forehead, and his brains blew out the back of his exploded skull. The upper half of his dead body pitched face first into the fire with a spray of sparks, as tiny orange flames licked around the edges of Roger's shirt and climbed up the back of his plaid collar. The stranger saddled up and rode out in search of more sinners he could save from the hellfires of eternal damnation.
Well done. Well done. Well done.
So you said earlier that was one of your favorites in the collection.
It is one of my favorites.
What strikes you about that one?
I think the twist,
Yeah.
but also, and like many of the other, a couple of the other stories, including Meaning of Blood, and the confession, the first one in the book, the confession of
Jeremiah Heath. Yeah,
Jeremiah Heath. You like the Wild West.
I do like the Wild West. I grew up watching Western films and reading Westerns. My grandfather was a big fan of those.
Right, and it's I think because in your biography it says you're an Americanist.
By academic training, yes, I am a scholar of American literature, specifically 19th century American.
Ah, right. This is what I was like. I wasn't familiar with the term. It's interesting. Yeah, no, there's that. And folks, as I said to Chuck earlier on, it's really hard to discuss short stories and not give away plot and spoilers. So I really don't want to. But I have to say, Hatchet Job is definitely the one that gave me nightmares, because that's got a big slug in it. What was the inspiration for Hatchet Job?
For Hatchet Job, well, that's sort of a funny story. Sometimes when I'm looking for inspiration, I'll sort of peruse the calls for short stories for anthologies and collections, and see if one of the calls catches my attention and sort of sparks an idea. And that one I had originally written in response to a call for stories about unusual weir animals. They didn't want werewolves. They wanted something else that they hadn't seen before. And since banana slugs are so prevalent in the Northwest, I don't know if you've ever actually seen a banana slug in real life. They're called banana slugs, I think, maybe partly because of the size, although they're not quite banana sized. But they get pretty big. They're as big as a couple fingers. And they're sort of mottled brownish, often with yellow on them. And you find them everywhere. They're sort of homeless snails, right? There's no shell on the back at all, but they slither around, and you'll find silvery trails on your front porch steps or on the walk out in front of your house all the time, especially in the winter in the Northwest.
Right. Yeah. No, I really don't. Well, I'm fine with slugs. I don't like them. As I say, your story really did. I got halfway through reading and fell asleep, and therefore dreamt about it.
Yes.
Which was because I was reading it when I was in Chicago last week, and then I remember, and we have slugs in our garden. They all get carefully picked up and put in the same bin as the dog poo.
Right.
They get carried out the house, basically.
They're back out.
yeah. So slowly but surely over the years, we are eliminating slugs from our garden. Stop throwing them into the neighbor's back garden, and now they go out the front door. But I do remember coming onto the patio once and finding a slug eating another slug.
Oh, that's
horrible. Just
that's pretty awful. Yeah. So, no, and I love those kind of monster stories. So this was a great opportunity to sort of explore basically fresh territory as far as I knew from a monster story perspective.
Yeah.
To circle back to the Westerns, I love that there's sort of this preset template almost. That we all in our minds we can picture the sort of the stock characters and the town that has the saloon and the barbershop and all these things. And so I sort of love taking that and then putting sort of unexpected stories into that setting, because I feel like Westerns have fallen out of disfavor and sort of come back and tried to make comebacks repeatedly over the last 150 years probably. But I feel like there's still a lot of room within that genre to explore characters that are sort of in these shades of gray. A lot of the older stories have tended to be, you have the black hats and the white hats and the outlaws and the sheriffs and they haven't explored necessarily that in between area of sort of average, everyday moral turpitude on the part of of humanity, which is as you know from reading the other stories, that's an area that I really like to explore. Is under what conditions can any person become a murderer or do things that they would find repulsive and unacceptable in others, and how do people take a wrong-headed idea and sort of run with it to fatal consequences, right? So
yeah,
that's what I like to explore, and I feel like the Western is a nice place to do that. They seem to resonate pretty well with British readers as well, which pleases me.
Yeah, was it? I stumbled across. They were. I've missed most of the episodes, but I stumbled across the Virginian. They're rebroadcasting the Virginian over here. Now I remember watching that as a kid on the TV, from the very, very beginning, with Clu Gallagher and Doug McClure and so on, and Lee J. Cobb. I'm just watching the Virginian avidly as a kid, and Bonanza and so.
Oh yeah, I grew up watching Bonanza every week.
yeah, and High Chaparral and so on. It was interesting. It's good, but also I think what I found very interesting about your writing is the strong first person voices. We mentioned the conversion earlier on. Do you like writing as narrator or first? Which do you find easiest, writing as narrator or?
It really depends on the story. So sometimes the voice of the narrator will start speaking to me or coming through me, and when it does that, I tend to sort of run with it. That said, I feel like a lot of stories are better told from a slight remove, more of a third person perspective. In the story that I just read, Hellfire, I think the voices come through strongly in the dialogue, but with that one, I felt like I couldn't really be first person from either point of view. Roger obviously doesn't survive the end of the story. But then I also wanted the stranger to have a little more distance than we would have had if we'd been sort of in his head.
Yeah.
But other stories like Whistling Pete, that's another Western story, but that's told from the first person point of view of an adolescent boy who finds himself in sort of extreme situations. Whistling Pete just sort of started coming through me, and so I let it do that. Yeah.
Cool. Now, one of the sort of series, 6 Cases of Beaujolais. Now, I think of this as because I think of Beaujolais Nouveau. Is this an American thing as well, or is this? I wasn't quite sure whether I read it as if it was set in London, because
that story really could be set anywhere. It could be set in London, certainly. And yeah, it's absolutely about Beaujolais Nouveau. And I have friends that have Beaujolais Nouveau parties every year where they get the new wine and or have people bring different bottles of it, and you try it out. But that story in particular, again, I'll try not to have any spoilers in it, but that story, as I think we've mentioned already, Edgar Allan Poe definitely is a big influence for me. And that story in particular, I really wanted to take a couple different Poe ideas and mash them up into something that would feel fresh and new, but still have that kind of Poe quality to it. And I'm pleased with that story. And it seems like you liked it as well.
Yeah, no, very much so. And I particularly liked Adrift on a Sea of Hunger, which felt very much like Poe.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Like the seafaring qualities of that.
Yeah, like and Descent into the Maelstrom, and so on. Yeah. But also, perhaps the use of the language, kind of echoed that for me. And speaking of Poe, and we'll delve a little bit more deeply into that. Kim Lehman's asked, Chuck, what is your favorite Edgar Allan Poe poem? Hers is Annabel Lee.
Hers is Annabel Lee. I love Annabel Lee. That's a wonderful poem. Probably my own personal favorite of Edgar Allan Poe's poems is The Raven, and that's partly because in writing my dissertation for my doctoral degree, I wrote about Edgar Allan Poe, and I wrote specifically about his aesthetic theories, which, well, he would have called them poetics, but his aesthetic theories. And I really felt like The Raven crystallized and epitomized a lot of his aesthetic theories. And I ended up writing if you can believe it, a 50-page chapter analyzing The Raven. So that's one that I've sort of been back and forth over many times and looked at it from a lot of different angles. So that probably is my favorite.
Wow. And what about the short stories?
Of the short stories, there's so many that I love. Probably The Black Cat's a strong favorite of mine. I also like Ligeia quite a bit. And I think Berenice is just utterly creepy. That's probably his most sort of truly terrifying story would be Berenice, in my opinion. If you haven't read those, go find them and read them.
Right, I don't. I'm not. I know Ligeia, and I'm looking down at
Berenice is the one with the teeth.
Say again?
Berenice is the one with the teeth, if that rings a bell for you.
No, I think it. So this is my introduction to Edgar Allan Poe, the Arthur Rackham illustrated tales of mystery and imagination, and I'm just trying to see if
that book looks well loved.
It is. Oh, it's the last story. No, it's not the last story. It is in here. I shall go back and read Berenice.
Okay. That one will give you nightmares too.
Oh, good. I might leave that for tomorrow.
It's good. Always nice to have a good nightmare.
Yeah. What about film adaptations? Have you got a favorite film adaptation?
Well, you know, I love the Vincent Price reading of The Raven, which I'm sure people can find on YouTube or elsewhere. That's definitely worth watching. The film adaptations, although there have been quite a few, I don't know that they've ever been done in any sort of a way that was felt to me very faithful to Poe, which is an interesting problem to have, I think, particularly because Poe is so sort of well known and highly regarded generally, but it's particularly in the horror field. It's a strange thing that happens to certain writers, that they sort of never quite get adapted in the ways that you would expect. I think that another big influence on my short story writing is Ray Bradbury. And there have been a number of adaptations of his stories and books, but again, there's not really any one that you can point to and think that, oh, that's that, you know, they really captured it there. I mean, I suppose the Truffaut Fahrenheit 451 is a good film, and the Rod Steiger Illustrated Man has its moments. But do you remember that one?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've not seen it in years.
But yeah, so yeah, it's interesting how certain things get adapted and certain things don't. I don't know why. For example, Philip K. Dick, who's a marvelous science fiction writer of sort of weird psychological tales, he's sort of become the touchstone of Hollywood in recent years, and we keep seeing more and more adaptations of his work, but they don't necessarily go back and look at Poe or Ray Bradbury, even Harlan Ellison, who's got marvelous dark stories. There's A Boy and His Dog, which was a film that I loved, but I can't think of really any other things that have been adapted from his work.
Interesting, isn't it? Yeah, I wonder if, because Poe is so very much of a particular time and place. Well, no, having said that, it's a particular style of writing. The language is so different. Whether that is a barrier, because then it means costumes, whereas the more modern writing, is it's easier to update.
That could be some of it. It may go back to a thing that you mentioned about my writing, is sometimes the stories are so intertwined with that first person voice. That can be a challenge for filmmakers to, you have certain devices you can use, like a voiceover, or having the character address the audience directly, but a lot of times that voice I think is really hard to maintain in a cinematic format.
Cool.
Film and writing are different things, right? They're
yeah, I think that I do wonder if some is you cannot faithfully adapt a story because they're different art forms.
They really are, yeah.
And what's the thing, the experience of a reader in their own imagination is based on their own experience, and they're going to see it in a very specific way in the mind's eye, and that will never be matched by a filmmaker's, because particularly unless the author has been very specific in the story of doing an awful lot of description, which can make heavy reading, then it's never going to be. It's like, okay, it's absolutely it has to be a red T-shirt because that's an absolute vital plot point. But if you see it, okay, that's interesting. Okay, so got a couple of questions and comments coming in. Derek, hi Derek. Even though Poe's stories are, for all intents and purposes, separate, that people join them into a universe, especially in the like of the role-playing game communities. I may not have read this out properly, but I'm not sure if I've understood you. Even though Poe's stories are, for all intents and purposes, separate, that people join them into a universe, especially in the like of the role-playing communities, ? I'm not sure that I understand the comment, Derek, to be able to interpret it. But what you...
I think his underlying point is an interesting one, right? It is true that Poe's stories are standalone. You know, Poe doesn't really give us any indication that we're supposed to understand one story as, you know, sort of running concurrently or alongside of another story. He doesn't have recurring characters for the most part. He did write a trio of detective stories set in Paris, but other than that, the stories are sort of all over the place. And yet, all of those stories are so much Poe, right? It's just that the darkened city streets and the cellars and there's such atmosphere to those.
Yeah, no, yes,
and such a sort of an inner sort of claustrophobic paranoia to the stories that I think they do feel like they all take place within the same universe and within sort of the same claustrophobic mind.
Yeah. And I mean, I love the psychological story, The Imp of the Perverse, is one of my favorite stories, as is
one of my favorites as well. That's the story that inspired the subtitle to my collection of stories. That's why I wanted to call it Tales of Perversity. I mean, that's definitely a tip of the hat to Poe, and I wanted people to, especially Poe readers, to appreciate that. Oh, okay, we're moving into Poe territory with these tales.
Cool. And another question from Derek. I'll come back to your other. Actually, okay. Yes. Before we move away from Edgar Allan Poe, you mentioned when we were chatting yesterday, you've recently been involved in a documentary about Poe.
Yes, I was. I'm one of the featured talking heads, academically speaking, on the public broadcasting system here in the United States. PBS did a biography / documentary about the life of Edgar Allan Poe and about his enduring fame, but sort of reanalyzing his position in the literary canon. It's called Buried Alive. It came out last Halloween, not just a couple weeks ago, but the previous Halloween. But I think you can find it online on the PBS website or on the various networks. So I attended the International Poe Conference, and PBS had a film crew there, and they invited me to participate and answer a few questions. And I guess they found my answers to be interesting and engaging enough that I got quite a bit of airtime. So I was pleased with that. I joke with people that I'm the Shelby Foote of Edgar Allan Poe.
Well, we get PBS over here. I shall check out.
It's good, and they do a nice job too of they dramatize moments in Poe's life, which I feel like they did in a sort of a less cheesy way than what you often see. And in fact, there are some sort of startling images that are creepy and worthy of Poe stories in those dramatizations, which is nice.
Oh, interesting. Okay, very interesting. Okay, well, before we start talking about your hidden horrors, we've got a couple of comments. I'll take Kim's first, which was about Westerns. Chuck, since you are a fan of Westerns, are you a fan of the Stephen King books, The Gunslinger, the Dark Tower novels? Roland Deschain is my favorite character that he has created.
Yes, absolutely. I love the Dark Tower books. And Yeah, we could do a whole separate show about probably just talking about those Dark Tower books. But yeah, I agree that it is sort of a high watermark of Stephen King's work, and I'm glad he's now been able to sort of finish that cycle. But you know, that the thing that comes to mind for me right now, I do love those books, and the way that they're able to be a weird Western. I think there may be a weird Western or two in my writing future.
Right.
But that said, the thing that this reminds me of is there have been a lot of great film adaptations of Stephen King's work, but that was not one.
It didn't do well.
Oh, it's not good.
No,
it has some things going for it, and it should be better than it is, but it's really not. I think they tried to just cram too much. You know, those books go on for thousands and thousands of pages, and I think they wanted to give a sense of that scope, but it's sort of like I hate to knock David Lynch. He's one of my favorite film directors, but his film of Dune, I thought, suffered from similar sorts of problems. Right, those Dune books are epic in scope. You sort of can't cram them into.
Yeah, you're far better. You know, it's interesting. I think M. Night Shyamalan had a similar problem with Avatar.
Absolutely.
If you try and put everything, you know, in you just miss out on so much stuff, and it becomes, interesting.
Which of course is why we now have the golden age of television. I think it's fascinating that in the last 10 to 20 years, film, which used to be thought of as the ultimate novelistic cinematic dramatization, has now completely given way to television series, right? So you have something like Game of Thrones, right? That manages, although it has its own limitations in a certain way, but it manages to tell these sort of longer story arcs and really sort of capture the novel in a way that film can't because of the time constraints.
Yeah. Okay, and another question from Derek. Of all the games on the shelf behind you, which is your favorite?
Which is my favorite? I'll glance over my shoulder here. So a recent favorite is Prodigal's Club. If people haven't played that, that's definitely a game worth checking out. Probably Through the Ages is one of my all-time favorites. And that's an absolute classic. It's the if you like things like Settlers of Catan or Carcassonne, Through the Ages is sort of the next step into the madness that is obsession with board games. So I'll say Through the Ages. You can't go wrong with a game by Vlaada Chvátil. So
okay, that means nothing to me.
It will mean something to a few people.
It will mean. I think it probably means something to Derek. Yeah, Derek is a big gamer. So that will make perfect sense. Okay, so
tell Derek to also check out games by Ryan Lockett. He's an American gamer. Ryan Lockett. Yeah,
Ryan Lockett.
City of Iron. It's up at the top. I don't know if you can see it up there, but City of Iron is my favorite of his games.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move on to we've only got 20 minutes left. Okay. So
now we need to talk about our hidden horrors.
Yeah, let's talk about hidden horrors. First of all, we're going to talk about, if I can squeeze some more questions in at the end, I will do. Island of Lost Souls, banned in the UK until 1958, though it was made in 1932. Amazing film. I remember reading the short story. Reading the book. Probably
sort of a novelette or novella.
Yeah, it's quite short. I think it must have been.
Well, that's right. So it's quite short.
Yeah. It was. It's like, why did you choose Island of Lost Souls?
Well, I chose Island of Lost Souls in part because it does feel like a hidden horror, right? Mm. A lost classic that that it was banned for all these years. Of course, part of that too is that H.G. Wells hated the film. But interestingly, I love H.G. Wells, so that's probably what drew me to choosing this one. And even though he hated the film, I feel like the film does some interesting things along the lines of what H.G. Wells himself did. So with the Island of Dr. Moreau, and his name never appears in the film or in the credits or anywhere. He wanted that taken away. So they changed the title. It's Island of Lost Souls rather than the Island of Dr. Moreau. But the doctor in the film is still called Dr. Moreau. And so they're not fooling anyone. But interestingly, I think one of the things about the film, before we even talk about the film, is to go back to Island of Dr. Moreau. Island of Dr. Moreau was horrifying to people when it came out and got H.G. Wells into all sorts of trouble because people thought it was literally true. They thought that he was reporting on genetic experiments that were turning animals into human beings. I know it's hard to imagine, right? But it's just such an amazing little moment in the sort of the history of H.G. Wells, especially given what happens then years later when Orson Welles adapts The War of the Worlds for radio and creates a huge panic around that story. So, I mean, that one of the things I just really, really adore about H.G. Wells is that even though he writes these sort of pulpy entertainments, on the one hand, he allows these sort of deeper philosophical problems to sort of drive the interest in the narrative. And that's true in his science fiction as well as in sort of the more horrific things. And I feel like the film deals with that to a certain extent.
It was interesting. Incidentally, I've forgotten to give the spoiler alert. I always forget to give a spoiler alert. In case you haven't seen the film, spoiler alerts. I do recommend seeing the film. It's really fascinating. You said genetic experiments. My memory of the book is actually more surgical than genetics, because genetics weren't really being,
of course, yeah.
in the, and I think that, to me, when I was reading, so I'd been reading this back in the late 1960s, probably the early 1970s.
Right. He wrote it, I think, essentially as an anti-vivisectionist tract.
Yeah. And I think there's the mention of the House of Pain, and it's fairly quickly established in the film. The central idea that basically Moreau is converting animals into human beings. I think
yeah. But he's also a sadist, right? So.
Yeah, I was just reading. It was the Eureka edition I got, and there was a very interesting interview with a gentleman called Jonathan Rigby, the film historian Jonathan Rigby, who I know because we acted together in a film called Borley Rectory. But Jonathan has written books on the history of films, and and really knows his stuff. And he was pointing out that a lot of the writing that when the point that he was making was that you've got Frankenstein kind of at the beginning of the 19th century, or the 1800s, and then when you get to the end of the 18th, and then it all goes kind of quiet in terms of Gothic literature, and then you get this big resurgence, and you get things like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and you get Dracula, and Dr. Moreau in particular, is the fact that he was saying the thing that really happened was Charles Darwin and the whole idea of evolution and the idea of degeneration, that human beings having evolved from an ape, they can easily devolve.
Sure.
Which is the kind of the whole idea, as I say, in the book and in the film, it talks about it's a surgical thing that is going on. He talks a bit about genetics in the film, because then by the 30s we had and terrifyingly you get Mengele in the 40s, doing that kind of research. But it's an incredibly powerful film. Actually, the reason I was picking up this booklet, which is, there's an essay by Kim Newman. Not Kim Lehman. Hi, Kim. Kim Newman in it, and he's saying, the things that this film involves are it takes off offensive topics in a way which seems calculated to bait the censorious, bestiality, I can't pronounce the word. Miscegenation, a Polynesian girl having
interbreeding between the races. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Vivisection, abortion, alcoholism, sadism, surgical torture, implied cannibalism, blasphemy, attempted rape, crimes against nature, lots of them, and a last real mob uprising that overthrows the established order. Yeah, no wonder they banned it.
Of course, but also no wonder I love it, right? Because I have almost all those same things in my collection of short stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very, I mean, it's really interesting. You know, they're saying that they didn't have the makeup kind of levels that you had in, say, for example, Frankenstein.
Sure.
But then it's a lot more to do. You know, there are awful. I think one of the central questions is, who is the monster? Who is the real monster? The half-naked, hairy men with tusks, or Moreau, who's perpetrated.
Well, and I think we know the answer to that, right? It does force us to ask that question.
Yeah, but there's some beautiful camera work in the movie as well. And I think, you know, towards the end of the movie, you suddenly start seeing these faces of whether they basically turn on their creator,
right?
And also have to say, Charles Lawton is bloody amazing.
He really is.
Yeah. Jonathan Rigby describes him as an epicene, which I think is a lovely euphemism. But he's just, you know, beautifully dressed in white, slightly fey, and totally terrifying character.
Yeah.
Because, you know, he manipulates people. And so on. And the other point that Jonathan Rigby made is that the fact that Tarzan movies and jungle movies were very popular at the 30s, so they really emphasized the jungle.
Absolutely, but people who were expecting a Tarzan film are going to be sorely disappointed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So
I haven't read this Jonathan Rigby piece. I'll have to track that down.
Yeah.
But does either he or Kim Newman talk about the American punk band Devo?
No.
Oh, see, that was when I was rewatching the film in preparation for our discussion here. I was struck. I had seen this film years ago, and I didn't remember making the connection to the band Devo. But there's a scene in the film where the creatures are responding to this shout of, "Are we not men? Are we not men?" And Devo, this Akron, Ohio band from the 70s and 80s, they have an album called "Are We Not Men? We Are Devo." So I think they absolutely knew this film and were making explicit reference to it, which just gives me joy. So
absolutely, well, that's an incredibly, because it's the recitation of the law. There's a wonderful cameo by Bela Lugosi as the speaker, you know, underneath masses and masses of yak hair.
Yes.
And it's really, and it's, you know, apart from all the things I've read out, it's tense and really quite disturbing the way, you know, for a film that's made in 1932, you know, it's very different from the style of stuff that you get these days.
Sure.
But it's got some really, and as I say, the camera, you know, you've got the camera zooming in on a whole load of faces, to actually individuate a mob, which is really cleverly done. Actually, just to show off the makeups that have been done, but also really just to individuate a mob, which actually makes the mob more scary, in my view. And these gorgeous, you know, they happen to be filming. They filmed it on a real island. They had a lot of mist, so they used an awful lot of that mist, which, you know, so it is a fog enshrouded island, the Isle of Dr Moreau. But really interestingly drawn characters, and yeah, if you've not seen it, I've loved it. I really, really enjoyed it. As I did with your second choice, which was Waxworks, the silent film directed by Paul Leni, and I should really have got my IMDb up to double check it, because there's two directors credited.
I think it's mostly credited to Leni, but
Yeah.
yeah, that's a 1926 film.
Yeah. No. Why did you choose this one?
No, I like these old films because I think a lot of times people people forget about them or overlook them or think, oh, it's going to be too corny to watch a silent film. We're so enamored with our effects that we have now and CGI and all that sort of thing. But I think that there's a lot to be taken from these older films. I particularly like silent film personally. I've often been concerned that watching too much film or television is not good for writers. And that said, I still watch a lot of film and television, but I feel like silent films and even the other film, the Island of Lost Souls that we've been talking about, it's older enough that that it doesn't sort of impinge upon the way one thinks about literature, because they're films that are very much filmed. They're not written in a certain way, but I love that in both of these films, they let the pictures tell the story, and of course you have to do that in a silent film, especially, right? So there's not exposition, and I like that because I feel like it doesn't sort of infect my own way of internally narrating or verbalizing things. It invites me to join in and sort of build the story myself in a certain way. Now, Waxworks is an anthology film, so it's sort of it's like a creep show kind of thing, right? Or Twilight Zone, where we have this introduction where this writer is hired to create, what does he say? He wants an inventive writer or imaginative writer to create stories about all these waxwork figures. And then we go into the wax museum, and then we get a story about each of these figures. Unfortunately, the least interesting story takes the longest to tell, and it's a short film anyway. It's what, an hour and 15?
Yeah, I think it's an hour. That is an hour and 5 minutes.
Right. So you sort of have to bear with the Arabian Nights kind of story. It comes across, I think, now a little bit like a Canterbury Tales joke, right? So it's it's a lot of build up and a lot of drama around a very minor play that happens at the end. But if you stick around, I think you're rewarded. And I don't want to give spoilers because I want people to watch this, and I'm sure no one's seen it. But if you stick around, you get some good stories about Ivan the Terrible and about Jack the Ripper.
Well, no, Spring-Heeled Jack.
Spring-Heeled Jack. Yes.
So it was a slight, but interesting.
Are those not the same? I tend to conflate those two.
Yeah, no. Well, of course, Spring-Heeled Jack is a very, and I think the filmmakers did.
Okay.
I think, yeah, no, actually, that makes a lot of sense, because the Spring-Heeled Jack, who you see in the film in Waxworks, really isn't related to Spring-Heeled Jack, who was there were a whole load of newspaper reports about a figure who could leap tall buildings and spat fire in people's faces and look like a demon.
That's not Jack the Ripper at all.
No, that's not Jack the Ripper at all. And the character in the film is very much more like Jack the Ripper. Yeah. Wonderful dream sequence. Really, really effective dreams. Sorry, spoiler. But really, really effective.
There are a lot of very, very effective shots in that film for 1926 silent film. And even though I sort of disparaged it, the Arabian Nights sequence when the scene where the baker is running away from the guards, I just love it. Sort of this weird hallucinatory where he's going through the labyrinth, and it's like an Escher staircase, and I absolutely.
Well, it's heavily influenced by Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and and obviously Paul Leni is a German filmmaker. And a lot, a lot of those guys came across in the 30s and brought a lot of that aesthetic with them. I have to say, Conrad Veidt is just terrifying as Ivan the Terrible.
Yeah.
And he's interesting. Paul Leni also directed him in The Man Who Laughs. Again, the extraordinary face, but it's, this is a really poor quality image. You can see this movie on YouTube. I found it on YouTube. It's not digitally remastered, but even through all the noise of the image that you're looking at, Conrad Veidt is just hypnotic. Absolutely amazing. And again, what you see, because you've got no dialogue and you've only got the title cards that come up with what dialogue there is, it's down to the actors. And they spend a lot of time pointing the camera at characters reacting, thinking, having a thought process, making decisions in their mind as to what they're going to do and how they're going to be reacting to a situation. And Veidt's performance of paranoia, or portrayal of paranoia, is absolutely entrancing as far as I'm concerned.
I agree. Absolutely. People should watch this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's absolutely amazing. Again, thank you so much indeed for choosing that one, because if you haven't seen it, folks, I really do recommend it for the reasons that we've kind of just elucidated. Okay, yeah. So, all right, we're kind of at the end of the show now. So what's next for you? So obviously promoting this book. What else have you got lined up, or what else are you working on?
Well, I'm one of those authors who always has about 3 or 4 different projects in the works. I've always got more short stories coming out. So watch for more stories from me. I've already, even since turning this over to the publisher, I've written 3 or 4 more stories that would have fit in here. So some of those will find homes out in the world, but I'm already starting to squirrel things away for another collection. And then I'm also working on a new novel, and it's going to be no surprise here, I suppose. It's going to be a Western, but right. It will certainly have some of the darker, more horrific elements that readers of this collection will hopefully grow to appreciate and love the way that I do. So I'm just throwing my my minor piece in behind sort of Quentin Tarantino and the Coen brothers and David Milch that did Deadwood and trying to make Westerns popular and relevant again, because I think there's still a lot to be mined from that particular genre. Right. But again, as I said earlier, particularly in terms of exploring sort of deeper and darker human stories that may have been missed in some of the sort of more black and white tellings of that history. Right.
Cool. All right. Well, I look forward to reading those when they're out and about. Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed, Chuck.
Thank you so much for having me, Nicholas. It's been a real pleasure.
Good. All right then, folks. Well, I'm not sure about a show next week. The reason why I say that is because I'm just trying to find confirm a guest at the moment. But I will publish, as I mentioned, on the Facebook page, any details of all the future shows. So hopefully see some of you again soon. And this has been Chattering with Nicholas Vince. I've been talking with Chuck Caruso about his new book, his collection of short stories, The Meaning of Blood and Other Tales of Perversity, which is published by Cloud Lodge Books. There is a link down there somewhere. Check it out, folks. It's really good fun. Now I'm going to hit